Hi, my name is Uber Cordero, and welcome back to my show at the Uber Cordero Show. If you're new here, we talk about international affairs and things that affect African politics, as well as other issues in the national arena. Now, in this week's episode or lecture, I'm going to be talking about international law as it pertains to the Russian-Ukrainian issue. And one of the reasons we're doing this is partly to kind of interject into this discourse from a perspective of international law, but also just to inform people in general about what's going on and why international law is an important element of discourse when it comes to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Just to warn our listeners that there's a disclaimer here that one, there's sort of kind of like an attempt of objectivity when talking about scholarship on current events, because you can be enmeshed in what is going on in order to study it. You have to step away a little bit more and have an objective lens on it. That's not to say that what I'm presenting here is um, one-sided or objective in many ways, but it is a function of what historically has happened and what my analyses are of the issue, if that makes sense to you. But another thing to consider is that the events are unfolding and things are changing, and what we are talking about it is as of now, which is Ukraine that is surrounded by Russian forces, and the Ukrainian fighters are fighting very hard to defend their country as they should. So it's like interesting and very pivotal moment in international relations, especially after the Cold War, where the rules and functions of international law are tested. Now, how am I qualified to talk about this? At the moment, I am a professor of assistant professor of international political economy. So one of the areas of my study is international law, and so my presentation here is based on that background. Um, so what is international law? That is the question, and we can define international law in so many ways, but one way to think about it is that the world has no government. There's no 911 to be called when there's a problem in a particular country. So states are like coexisting in the international sphere without like a clearly defined leadership. So in domestic law, you have a sense of hierarchy. Um, there is the like in the United States, there's like state government, federal government, and municipal government, county governments, and each of these governments have like responsibilities for the citizens of places that they govern, and they have like police or people are responsible for waste and trash picking. There's like a sheriff department, 911, and all these other actors that can help with governance. But in the world, there isn't such. So the world is anarchical. There is no government for the world. So then international law comes in as an opportunity to fill that void. So how we define it is that it is a body of rules that bind states and other agents in the world, and make sure that world politics has a certain level of structure and is governed by principles that have clearly definable do's and don'ts. And some of these definable do's are what states should do, which is the right to defend themselves, the right to have sovereignty over their people, and the right to be a member of international community. And some of the don'ts that exist in international law are things that states shouldn't do. And some of them is aggressive tendency toward their neighbors, committing genocides, or use of force on their own citizens or other nation citizens, or espionage and other forms of acts that are aggressive and militant. So because international law do not have an enforcer, sort of like how you have a Supreme Court or a court, general court, circuit court, enforced by the sheriff department, or has like an arrangement in which people can be kind of coerced to follow the law. International law doesn't operate like that. Instead, it operates on normative principles. Like everybody just agrees that it's a certain way of operation, and once you buy into these norms, you follow onto them. But they do offer ways of solving collective problems. Because of international law, we have agreements on nuclear capabilities and how we can use that. We have agreement on what constitutes a genocide, even though that can be debatable. We have agreement of respecting ambassadors when they live in other countries. We can't prosecute them. And since 1945, at the beginning of what is presently called the International Liberal Order, the international law has sort of expanded in a massive way, in such a way that every facet of relations between states is in some way defined by international law in more robust ways than before the war. So how does the Putin's issue come in here? Putin's invasion of Russia. Notice I use the word Putin's invasion of Russia because this kind of, in my view, this is not like a collectivist Russian agenda of invading Ukraine. It's more like Putin as an individual himself invading Russia, making this decision alongside some of the closest members of his inner circle. So one of the things that it does, it violates Article 2.4 of the UN Charter, which prohibits the use of force against territorial sovereignty, especially for a peaceful country. So Putin has violated international law, and he has kind of engaged in what is called a concept, which arises way back from the Roman times, called utai possidetes. That is, states have to accept boundaries as they are. As the new state is formed, it kind of becomes synonymous with an existing boundary as agreed by previous government. So an example here is after the U.S. war with Mexico in 1880s, the new boundary, 1860s, the new boundaries, which included a much southwest USA, including California, Arizona, and Texas, used to be Mexican possessions. But then when Mexico lost the war with the United States, the new agreement was that Mexico lost these territories and they become a part of United States. So it is utai possidetes because this new government, this new formation, and especially after Mexican independence, inherited the Mexican boundaries as they were before. Another way to explain it is the colonial decolonization in Asia and Africa. And as those countries gain independence, rather than correct boundaries as they existed before based on ethnic makeup, they agreed to govern with the new boundaries as constituted at independence. So sometimes in February, about 2 weeks ago, UN General Assembly held a special meeting to condemn Russia's aggression after Russia had vetoed a UN Security Council resolution terming Russian invasion of Ukraine as an aggression. So in this vote, which is kind of rare, only about 10 of them have happened since UN became a thing. About 140 countries voted to condemn Russia's action and to call this an invasion. And that's kind of very rare for that to happen. So it was a unanimous agreement that Russia's actions were in violation of international law. But it's just not that Russia was wrong. What is interesting to see is how Putin also uses international law to make a case for his invasion. Putin, on February 24th speech, right before the troops marched through Belarus into Ukrainian territory, he talked about norms of international law since 1945, after the Second World War. So here we see Putin using the same logic of international law to make excuse for his invasion. Putin mentioned incidences of American and NATO disregard of norms of international law, especially the Belgrade bombing during the Balkan crisis in the 90s, the United States invasion of Iraq in 2003, the invasion of Libya 2011, and the war in Syria since 2011. Putin pointed out these incidences as United States and NATO's aggression and violation of international law. He used this to make a case that his actions were in line with United international law because there was a precedence of this disregard. And what he was doing was the right to defend the right for self-defense for Ukrainian seceding territories in the eastern part. And he argued that there was elements of what he called Nazification as well as genocide targeting Russian-speaking people in eastern Ukraine. So one thing I want you to take notice of here is, while international law clearly condemns Russia's action as aggression, almost colonialism, Russia has to go back to the same international law to make a case that his actions are in line with international law, because his only concern is the defense of people who are getting hurt by a sovereign state, Russian-speaking people in the Ukraine, mostly in Donbas region. So that's really interesting that both here international law is being used for different outcomes. Now, so in that regard, this leads to the other point I wanted to make. The liberal order and the rule-based system is kind of reinforced, even though it seems like it's a crisis. It has reaffirmed the international commitment towards going back to international law as a way of solving problems. And in such a way that the Kenyan ambassador to the United Nations, his name is Martin Kimani, he gave a speech at the floor of United Nations in New York. He said that the liberal order is not only for powerful actors, liberal order meaning international law and internationalism. It's not only for powerful actors like United States, China, or USSR. It's necessary for stability. Small states rely on international law and international order to protect themselves, because the powerful actors will eat them for lunch if it didn't exist. And they do this for stability at great sacrifice, because if they want, they would have loved to revise this law. It'd be fun for many groups in Africa to change the boundaries to accommodate ethnicities that fall out of those boundaries as they inherited them. Yet the international system must also consider when these norms have worked and when they have been violated, and why both outcomes are possible in one system. So what I'm saying here is that while international law is clearly accepted and clearly agreed to have created a sense of stability in the world, we are also seeing a pattern in which international law has been violated by powerful actors and by small nations sometimes. So how come a system that is very stable can provide two different outcomes at the same time? This is really the question that we have to ask and grapple with. So Ukraine is a watershed moment for global reflection. It's a watershed moment because for the first time since 1945, the reach and the capacity of international law to solve problems is tested in such a way that if it goes wrong, we could go back to the very thing that we are trying to avoid since 1945, which is a world war. And any kind of miscalculation can easily lead to that. So that's the end of my lecture. I just wanted to share with you what my thoughts are. So in this regard, and as things unfold, I'll probably make more lectures to elaborate a little more. But on this instance, I just want to talk about how international law can be used to understand what is going on in Ukraine. Thank you.